everybody. It is Tuesday, July 9th, 2024. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast live from Washington, D.C. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And sometimes we go directly to where the story is happening. Jill, how was your trip down to D.C. today?
Oh, you had to ask, Moshe. Apparently, it was so hot that the train could not operate at its regular speed. So I took the train, the Acela. Yes.
And I took the plane and you took the train. Yes.
Yes. And it was a good experiment. I think you won. And it was, and unfortunately, from the beginning, they announced that we were going to have to go a little bit slower, that they couldn't go as fast as they normally would because the tracks would be hot. I'm guessing because the tracks would be so hot, or I don't really know exactly why. And then every once in a while, we were just smelling burned rubber, like a smell of like burning. Not the best smell when you're on a train.
No.
And then it would just stop and they would announce we're having some type of technical difficulty. We're getting a crew out to work on it. So it was touch and go for a while, but I made it.
Listen, I think it was an important experiment. I have gone through this for 20 years, commuting between Washington and New York at various times. Do you take the train? Do you take the plane? Sometimes one wins out. Jill, I didn't tell you this, but the plane actually got here early today. Like that's how efficient Delta was from LaGuardia to Washington, D.C. But on any given day, it could be totally the opposite. You could have totally won. So I'm glad you're here in one piece. I'm here in one piece. We're here for the NATO summit this week. We'll be over at the White House today. We'll be at the Pentagon today. We are joined by about 36 world leaders with us this week. So a lot of big stories. We'll talk a bit about it in today's pod and the coming podcast over the next few days.
And Moshe, I have never been to the White House, so I'm extremely excited for that private tour that we're going to be getting. And I can't wait to tell everyone about it on tomorrow's podcast.
Jill, you get the official White House tour, and then you get my fun anecdotes over the last few administrations. I'll be pointing out interesting things.
Well, that's what I'm really looking forward to. All right, let's get to the headlines because, per usual, tons of news. Joe Biden declares that all of the talk about replacing him must end. He is the nominee and that the party needs to unite against Donald Trump. Although it comes as we're learning more about a Parkinson's disease specialist who has been visiting the White House repeatedly, what the White House is saying or not saying about it. Russia launches its heaviest bombardment of Kyiv in 4 months, this time hitting a children's hospital. It comes, again, as NATO leaders are gathering here in D.C. to discuss the next steps in the war. Hurricane Beryl leads to several deaths in Texas and nearly 3 million people without power. And we are days away from Donald Trump announcing his vice presidential pick, the latest on who it might be. Columbia University dismissing several deans after it was found that they were exchanging anti-Semitic text messages mocking Jews on campus. The manslaughter trial for Alec Baldwin gets started today for that on-set shooting that killed a cinematographer. LeBron James re-signs with the LA Lakers and talks about his excitement about playing on the same team with his son Bronny this fall. And we'll tell you why Spanish protesters are going around squirting tourists in Barcelona and other cities with water guns. And Moshe is on this day in history.
A little bit of Bob Dylan, a little bit of The Office, and some tennis history for you today, Jill.
All right, President Biden dug in on Monday, telling Democrats that he was committed to, quote, running this race to the end, and that it was time for conversations about changing nominees to stop. He said point blank yesterday that he is done talking about the debate. He is the nominee, and it is time to move on. In a letter to congressional Democrats, Biden said that he had had extensive conversations with party leadership, members, and voters over the past 10 days. He said he was not blind to the concerns about his age, but at the same time, he said he was heartened by, quote, rock solid, steadfast support from so many colleagues. Some Democrats say that he still has to go and that his attempt is just posturing. Others say it was convincing. House Democrats have their big weekly private caucus meeting this morning where things could get heated. Some members say that Biden's unpopularity could bring them down this November. House Democratic leaders are also trying to crack down on leaks. Cell phones will report reportedly not be permitted in the meeting.
Jill, I'm not sure that's going to stop leaks. It might stop audio recordings, but Congress likes to talk to reporters.
Yes, if there's one thing Congress does well, it is leak information.
Leak information and play favorites with reporters, yes.
Biden also appeared on Morning Joe, his favorite morning political show, where the hosts, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, who he considers friends, have been increasingly asking questions about whether he can serve another 4 years following the debate. Biden phoned into the show on Monday, and here's a bit of what he had to say.
We're not going anywhere. I am not going anywhere. I wouldn't be running if I didn't absolutely believe that I am the best candidate to beat Donald Trump in 2024. The reason I've been out on the road so much all over the country, and while Trump is riding around in his golf cart, filling out his golf cart before he even hits the ball. But anyway, he hadn't been anywhere in 10 days. I've been all over the country, number one. And I've gone over the country for several reasons. One, to make sure my instinct was right about the party still wanting me to be the nominee. And all the data shows that the average Democrat out there who voted, the 14 million of them that voted for me, still want me to be the nominee. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the elites in the party who they know so much more. But if any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention.
So this is all intended by Biden in the White House here to head off growing defections in the Democratic ranks, stop basically this drip drop we've been getting every day of a few more members, a few more members, and then a few more on top of that, calling for him to go. Among the groups he's relying on, Jill, is African-American voters. It's why he showed up at a black church in Philadelphia over the weekend. He's been relying on them as his core base to say, there's a bunch of white elitists in the party who want me out, and you guys need to save me. And so this is where we're at. We're 13 days since the debate. And honestly, the more days we get beyond the debate and President Biden is still safe, the better for Biden. As he enters a couple busy weeks here, he's got the NATO summit this week in D.C. He's definitely not going to be embarrassed by his own party as 36 world leaders are here for the NATO summit that the U.S. is hosting for the first time in 2 decades. So that sort of saves him this week. Then next week, you have the Republican National Convention where they're going to want all the attention to be on Trump and pushing back on Trump. So that then brings us to 2 weeks from now, which then puts us nearly a month post debate. Question will be, at that point, how much of a debate will still be there? It really depends on where the polling is and where this conversation goes. So far, notable, Jill, the House. That's where you're seeing, these dozen or so calls for him to go out of the about 200 Democrats in the House. The Senate, relatively silent publicly, while privately some say he should go. The average age of the Senate, 64. Half the chamber is in their 70s and 80s. You have this dynamic of a very old Senate. And so it's hard for them to make an age argument, given that we just came off of Democrats defending Dianne Feinstein as she was literally being wheeled in and out of the U.S. Senate. So you have, Bernie Sanders, who's a year older than Biden, saying, "Oh no, I think saying, no, Joe Biden can totally serve. I'm a year older than him. He can totally be president." And so you have not seen much happening there. It really speaks to the geriatric political class we have in Washington, unwilling to question incumbency, accumulated power, the staff around these people that are invested in protecting them and keeping them in those offices for as long as possible for their own jobs. And so that's where things stand right now. So Biden looking safer by the day, despite some of these calls. At the same time, another major headline related to all of this, getting a lot of attention in D.C. in the last 24 hours, the White House visitor logs. Biden has promised transparency, and so you can see who comes in and out of the White House. That's something Trump did not do. But there might be some people at the White House saying maybe we should have followed Trump's lead here and blocked people from knowing who was coming to the White House, because we have now learned, based on the White House visitor logs, that an expert on Parkinson's disease has been visiting the White House repeatedly 8 times over the last 8 months between July of last year and March of this year, including one visit with the president's personal physician. The doctor is named Kevin Kennard. He's a neurologist. He's a movement disorder specialist over at Walter Reed. And according to logs, he's been coming monthly over to the White House. Now, the White House would not confirm if he was advising on the president's health. They frankly wouldn't confirm anything. It led to a whole altercation and yelling, effectively, during the White House briefing yesterday, where the White House is like, we don't have to tell you why he is here. And the press was asking, well, can you rule out that the Parkinson's expert was here to see about the president? They're like, we can't rule anything out for security reasons. That's what they said. Now, they would say that the president gets an annual physical. He sees a neurologist. He does not have Parkinson's symptoms, yet they wouldn't answer specific questions related to the Parkinson's expert. And so while, he keeps taking one step forward, there's one step back here. That meeting today among House Democrats is going to be interesting to watch to see whether there's movement there. But it appears, Jill, that the White House, the President Biden, has taken the incoming here, and so far is keeping his head above water. And the key thing for people to know here, and I've told you this repeatedly, there's no larger Democratic leadership structure making these decisions. The leader of the Democratic Party in America right now is Joseph Biden. And it is up to him to decide whether he wants to run for president. There's no one who can say, you must go. He has to decide he must go, which is why he's saying on Morning Joe yesterday, come to the convention, challenge me. Who wants to run against me? He's feeling very empowered here. He's feeling very confident. He thinks he can survive this. And ultimately, it really is up to him unless there's some total political insurrection, so to speak, at the convention next month in Chicago.
All right, staying in Washington, and the reason both of us are here in D.C., the NATO summit. President Biden set to meet with nearly 36 world leaders who are all here this week. The biggest issue on the agenda, the nearly 2.5-year-long war in Ukraine. We'll have more on the summit in a second, but let's first start with the latest from that region. Ukraine's largest children's hospital was destroyed by a Russian missile on Monday, part of a barrage of bombings by Moscow across the country. This one was one of the deadliest attacks on Ukraine's capital of Kyiv since the beginning of the war. 27 people in the city were killed. 11 others were killed across the country. More than 100 people were injured. The Ukrainian Air Force said it shot down 30 of the 38 missiles launched by Russia during the attack. The military saying, quote, the attack was massive, combined with the use of aerial, ballistic, and cruise missiles. They flew at the capital in waves and from different directions.
So President Zelensky in Ukraine says that President Putin of Russia should be held accountable for this. The UN's going to have meetings on today, but not much the UN can do, even the Security Council, because Russia sits as a permanent member there. That said, the Russians denied targeting the hospital. They say it was hit by fragments of Ukrainian air defense missiles, though Ukraine says it has found remnants of Russian cruise missiles. And video of the attack that was taken by a resident in Ukraine, verified by the New York Times, showed a missile moving downward at a high speed before striking the children's hospital. One missile expert looking at it saying this clearly is a Russian weapon. Its trajectory suggests an intentional attack on the hospital. The Ukrainian Air Force said Monday's attacks were carried out in part by bombers operating from deep inside Russian territory, where Ukraine is currently restricted from using Western weapons. The U.S., European powers have been limiting what Ukraine can do with Western weapons because they're scared of escalating this war even further. At the same time, Ukraine says, please take the handcuffs off of us and let us execute this war as necessary 2.5 years in. I imagine that'll be among the topics this week in Washington, Jill. Zelensky is going to be here on Thursday, but Ukraine will be front and center here. It's the main topic the NATO countries have been addressing. It's one of the reasons why when we talk about NATO, we're talking about 32 countries now instead of 30, because Finland and Sweden both joined in the last couple of years in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Sensing the Russian threat, they want to be part of the alliance. So you can expect here in Washington that there will be new efforts announced to bolster Ukraine's air defenses, especially in the aftermath of this attack, and ways to keep aid flowing. There are signs here in the U.S. and in other countries where a certain portion of the populations are saying, we're sort of done with this war. We're sort of done supporting Ukraine in the billions and the tens of billions of dollars. But a big thing here will be security guarantees for Ukraine. And NATO has indicated that at some point, Ukraine will be admitted into NATO. But there is some major concerns about that because, of course, there's something called Article 5 in NATO, which means if one country is attacked, everybody gets involved, which means if you let Ukraine in now in the middle of this war, the next time Russia sends a bullet over, a missile over, that effectively then brings in all of NATO into a war with Russia. That's something we've been trying to avoid since World War II. So they're trying to give Ukraine as much support as possible without officially letting them into NATO. And so those will be among the things we're asking over at the Pentagon today, over at the White House, and over the course of the summit.
And Moshe, there's a lot riding on this conference for Joe Biden. Of course, as we were just mentioning, questions about whether he's up to the job. So you can bet that everyone is going to be watching how he handles conversations with world leaders. He's actually going to be holding a press conference on Thursday. Something tells me it will be must-see TV. And journalists, voters are going to probably be parsing all of his words and seeing how he does.
Yeah, one of the storylines that came out in the past couple of weeks is that at the G7 summit in Europe last month, there were some concerning moments that world leaders had with Biden, that he sort of lost his train of thought. He was getting lost. At one point, Secretary Blinken apparently had to show him had to show him what subject to be talking about. And so a lot of scrutiny in these coming days, I imagine coming from his fellow world leaders, as well as at that big press conference on Thursday, which will be the first opportunity in that sort of setting since the debate, 2 weeks since the debate, where he's going to be going off the cuff and taking questions that'll be challenging.
Time for the speed read from Reuters. Tropical storm Beryl's strong winds and torrential rain killed at least 2 people, closed oil ports, grounded hundreds of flights, and knocked out power to nearly 3 million homes and businesses in southeast Texas on Monday. Beryl made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane and then weakened slightly after pounding the Texas coast with dangerous storm surges and heavy rain before moving across Houston. In Texas, a 53-year-old man and a 74-year-old woman were killed in 2 incidents by trees that fell onto their homes in the Houston area on Monday.
The big risk in Texas and Oklahoma were flash floods in and around Houston, up through northern Texas. Flash floods can be even more hazardous if water becomes electrified due to downed power lines. So I hope if you live down there, you were listening to your local weather forecaster. The storm has also been producing some small tornadoes in eastern Texas, western Louisiana, and southwestern Arkansas. And this is not all for Beryl. The remnants of the storm will be making its way through Arkansas, Missouri today, then going up through Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio. So make sure if you live anywhere in that path that you're checking the forecast because Beryl will still be packing a bit of a punch.
Back to politics from Fox News. Former President Donald Trump's long-awaited announcement on who his vice presidential pick will be could likely happen this week. Senior advisor Jason Miller telling Fox that we will know who the vice presidential choice is by next Monday morning. It could reportedly happen anytime this week ahead of the Republican National Convention, which kicks off on Monday. The AP reports that the future Republican VP candidate's plane is currently parked in an undisclosed hangar, an empty spot on its fuselage where a decal featuring his or her name will soon be placed. And fundraisers have already been planned.
Yes.
Who's it going to be, Moshe?
Less than a week from now, next Monday night, there will be a fundraiser in Milwaukee as part of the convention, and the VP choice will be part of it. So sometime in the next 6 days, we will learn who it is. And of course, Trump, a master marketer, will be waiting for the moment he feels is right to announce the name in the way that he sees fit. That's it. And that's if he's made a final decision. A lot of talk right now is that he still isn't certain, that there's a few names at the top of his list, and he keeps going back and forth. Among them, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, and I keep hearing Ben Carson as well, former cabinet member. He's been playing a lot of golf in Florida. He's a Trump loyalist, and that's going to be key to Trump here. He wants someone who is loyal to him. Other names being thrown around: Elise Stefanik, the congresswoman from New York, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the governor of Arkansas.
Do you remember that debate when Ben Carson when Ben Carson wouldn't walk onto the stage when they called his name? And then Trump stood behind it.
There was an ABC debate where they weren't hearing things, and then there was this traffic jam of candidates who were all like jammed up, and nobody knew. And nobody knew who to go on stage anyway. It's a fun little clip to watch. It's the ABC 2016 debate. I think Jill is referencing. That said, Ben is very loyal to him, so he could be a choice here. You also have Congressman Byron Donalds, who's a young black congressman, Republican, adamant MAGA guy out of Florida, who could be a choice here. A lot of people are hearing Burgum. Anyway, nobody really knows because there's a lot of people, and Trump likes to entertain multiple voices. What should I be doing? What should I be doing? It's sort of a Apprentice. It's sort of the latest season of Apprentice for him as he chooses his VP. And he enjoys this waiting game. He enjoys the speculation and keeping everyone on their toes. And he's going to have to make an announcement, though, because the convention is next week. They're going to have to nominate the VP with him. Remember, with VPs, you try to do no harm, number one. You try to have some net benefit. And for Trump, obviously, loyalty is super important, given the aftermath of January 6th, where he felt that Mike Pence defied him, defied his will. So he wants somebody who will not overshadow him, who will not be louder than him, who will not put their ambitions in front of him, and be deferential to what he wants.
Moshe, I could almost see him doing like an Apprentice style, making all of the potential, making everyone who's on his potential short list kind of stand next to each other.
Sit across the table from him? Yeah. With like Don Jr. on one side and Ivanka on the other. I mean, listen, still got time.
All right, from the Associated Press, Columbia University said Monday that it has removed 3 administrators from their positions and will keep them on leave indefinitely after finding that text messages they exchanged during a campus discussion about Jewish life included anti-Semitic remarks. In a letter to the Columbia community, the university president, Manoush Shafiq, said the administrators have been permanently removed from their positions at the university's undergraduate Columbia College. They are still employed by the university. They are getting paid. They just will not be returning to their previous jobs. The college's dean, who previously apologized for his part in the text exchanges, will remain in that role. The university will also reportedly launch a, quote, vigorous anti-Semitism and anti-discrimination training program for faculty and staff in the fall, as well as related to training for students. This was pretty incredible, Moshe. Moshe, walk through exactly what happened here, because it's quite disturbing.
Yeah, so this all is in the aftermath of a report about a month ago in the Washington Free Beacon, where they published a number of photos that showed some text messages that were being sent between the administrators. This was all in an event on campus in late May called Jewish Life on Campus, Past, Present, and Future. A very emotional event as people were talking openly about their experiences. We've told you about what was happening at Columbia University with the tents, with some of the anti-Semitic attacks. And so this was an event that a number of the administrators were attending. Well, it turns out they were texting one another, mocking some of the speakers. And someone was sitting behind at least one of them, capturing photos of what they saw transpiring on the dean's phones. Among other things, they were playing on Jewish stereotypes about money. And the deans saying that they were using anti-Semitism for fundraising, playing on that anti-Semitic trope. They also used a vomit emoji to describe an op-ed about anti-Semitism that had been written by Columbia's campus rabbi. So pretty nasty exchanges between them, mocking exchanges, things that you wouldn't want to see from administrators.
Moshe, I watched a clip where somebody was able to actually time what they were texting each other with what was going on stage with, the speakers who were explaining what they were going through and what they felt like being Jewish on campus. And it just felt like so mean-spirited and so childish of the administrators at the school. And I just think it speaks to just how deeply seated this anti-Semitism really is.
Yeah, and legitimate concerns students have about these are the people you turn to when there are issues on campus, and yet this is how they actually feel. So Columbia was rocked by those protests in the spring. There's been a lot of aftermath here. As you noted, they're going to be undergoing this anti-discrimination training, this focus on anti-Semitism. We'll see how much of an impact that has in the aftermath of what has been a very tumultuous spring on a number of campuses.
From NPR, Alec Baldwin's involuntary manslaughter trial starts in New Mexico today. The 66-year-old actor faces up to 18 months in prison if he's convicted, but he has pleaded not guilty. Back in October of 2021, while he was rehearsing a scene for the Western film Rust, the gun that he was holding went off. It shot and killed cinematographer Helena Hutchins and wounded the director Joel Souza. Since the shooting, Baldwin has maintained his innocence, saying he was not responsible for the live bullet that was loaded into what was supposed to be a blank prop gun, and that he didn't even pull the trigger, that it just went off. Gun experts have alleged there is no way that it could have gone off without him pulling the trigger. Baldwin notes that he was handed the revolver and someone yelled "cold gun," which means that the gun did not have live rounds. And Moshe, there was an early legal win for Baldwin. The judge ruled Monday that prosecutors cannot introduce evidence of his status as a producer on that film. The judge saying, I'm having real difficulty with the state's position that they want to show that as a producer, he didn't follow guidelines, and therefore as an actor, he did all of these things wrong. Prosecutors have been trying to argue that because he was a producer of the film and one of the most experienced members in the cast, that he was ultimately responsible for the reckless behavior on the set. But now they will not be able to make that argument.
We told you a couple months ago about the verdict in the case of the film's armor, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. She was responsible for guns and ammunition on the set. She was already convicted of involuntary manslaughter earlier this year. She's currently serving an 18-month prison sentence. She doesn't want to testify in this case. She shows no remorse for her actions. So it'll be interesting to see to what extent that plays a role here in how the Baldwin case is prosecuted and the ultimate verdict. Jury selection will begin today. Opening arguments set to begin tomorrow. The argument again, Baldwin wasn't paying attention to safety training, and he should have known better. He should have done a safety check here. So we will see what takes place.
From NBC's Today Show, LeBron James opened up yesterday about his feelings that he'll be able to play alongside his son this fall. The basketball great just re-signed with the LA Lakers, and it comes as the team selected his 19-year-old son, Bronny James, during this year's NBA draft. The 39-year-old athlete and father of three said, quote, when it comes to basketball, it is the greatest accomplishment that I have ever had, which says a lot. He continued that while he's done it all as an individual, there is no greater accomplishment that will be able to overtake me being on the same floor as my son. And he added, it is the greatest thing that has ever happened.
So this duo, if this happens this fall, they'll become the first to play in the NBA, father-son duo to play in the NBA at the same time. And they'll also make history by playing on the same team. But at the same time, there have been accusations of nepotism here, Jill, especially given that Bronny James has struggled so far. A reminder that last July, he suffered cardiac arrest. The younger James, he missed the first 8 games of the NCAA season, diagnosed with a functionally significant congenital heart defect. He has struggled so far in practice sessions. People have been picking apart his game in a summer league game over the weekend. He didn't do so well. At the same time, LeBron, his dad, is like, he doesn't care. He doesn't listen to you people, and he's going to be great. So looking forward to seeing history made this fall.
And finally, from the BBC, thousands of people have been demonstrating against mass tourism in Barcelona. Footage filmed in the Spanish city over the weekend shows diners in popular tourist areas being squirted with water pistols and crowds of protesters chanting, "Tourists, go home." Others used red tape to close off hotel and restaurant entry points. On Saturday, the mayor of Barcelona renewed his firm commitment toward eliminating Airbnb-style short-term rentals in the city within 5 years. The new housing plan will remove more than 10,000 properties so that tourists cannot use them. They will be returned to residents. Spain saw about 85 million international visitors in 2023, according to the National Statistics Institute, and 15.6 million visited Barcelona specifically, one of the 10 most visited cities in the world.
Yeah, this is something we're seeing across Europe. Residents being priced out of living in their own cities because people are renting out their properties, getting much more from tourists, and people can no longer afford to continue living in the cities that they have lived in for a long time. So housing costs, a major issue here. We told you about it in Portugal recently. It's an issue in Spain, and not just in Barcelona. Earlier this spring, there was a large protest in Mallorca, where there are demonstrations against the lack of affordable housing there. Also in the Canary Islands, which is a group of islands off the coast of Morocco that is owned by Spain. There were demonstrations there about what's happening. And it's not just Spain. You're also seeing this in Amsterdam. You're seeing this in Greece. Jill, when you look at the top 10 tourism cities of 2023, And Airbnbs are huge in a number of these cities. 2 Spanish cities are in the top 10. You got Madrid is the 3rd most traveled to city in the world. Barcelona is number 9. And, Europe really takes the cake here. Paris is the number 1. You have Amsterdam at number 5, Berlin at number 6, Rome at number 7, London at number 10. All right, so Europe has 7 of the top 10 cities. There's 3 non-European cities in the top 10 most traveled to tourism cities in the world. Care to name any of them?
Non-European.
Yes. So 7 of the 10 are European cities, as mentioned: Paris, Madrid, Amsterdam, Berlin, Madrid, Barcelona, etc. There's 3 open spots, non-European cities most traveled to by international tourists.
All right, so I'm going to say maybe New York.
New York is number 8. Yes.
Where there are a lot of tourists, but I would never think to spray any of them with a water gun. Shanghai, maybe?
Close though. Your Asia city. Your Asia city is Tokyo.
Asia.
Tokyo is the 4th most traveled to city by international tourists. And then finally, the number 2 city in the world, Jill, when it comes to international tourism, just behind Paris, Dubai.
You know what? That's not actually surprising now that you say it. And interesting that New York is the only city in the U.S. that made that list. So, Moshe, you're sitting at dinner with Alex. You're on vacation. You're sitting outside enjoying a nice you had a nice siesta. You're enjoying maybe some sangria. And protesters come and squirt you with water guns. What do you do?
Jill, now I know to go to Spain armed with a water gun. I gotta be able to shoot back.
I was going to say, you'll look like a local.
There you go. All right, let's head to On This Day in History. Sticking with the European theme, on this day in 1877, the first Wimbledon championship was held. The All England Croquet and Lawn Tennis Club began its first tennis tournament at Wimbledon on this day in 1877. Tennis had its origins in a 13th century French handball game that was actually played on the grass. So tennis originally, so the origins of tennis go back 1,000 years. Staying in England here on this day in 1947, the engagement of Britain's Princess Elizabeth to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten was announced on this day in 1947. Of course, the two would go on to marry just several months later and be married for more than 70 years. A couple of musical and pop culture items to end the pod today. On this day in 1962, Blown in the Wind by Bob Dylan was recorded, though we should note that the much more popular version of it on the radio was the Peter, Paul, and Mary Blown in the Wind at that time. As they remade that song. Sticking with 1960s music history, on this day in 1965, Sonny and Cher, I Got You Babe was released. And finally, on this day in 2001, turning 22 years old today, The Office, the original British TV series with Ricky Gervais, debuted in the UK on this day in July of 2001, becoming a huge hit, and then spawning the American version with Steve Carell.
All right, Moshe, that's going to do it for this podcast episode from Washington, D.C. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
The reviews matter. We appreciate reviews, so definitely leave us a review if you can today. In the meantime, Jill, we'll be out and about in Washington, D.C., so stay tuned to the Instagram feed throughout the day for the latest developments.
All right, bye, everybody.